Thank you very much for your forbearance and for showing up in such large numbers for each of the sessions. If you were at the last one, you will have enjoyed a very lively discussion, and there'll be plenty more to follow. This is this afternoon's final session on revitalizing Europe's security and defense strategy versus limitations, and this is co-organized by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, we're very pleased to say. On the panel today, there is Joe Wood. I know Joe Wood as Joe Wood, but he's in fact Colonel retired Joseph R. Wood, former Deputy Assistant National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Next to Joe is Nick Whitney, Senior Policy Fellow, European Council on Foreign Relations, London, and former Chief Executive of the European Defence Agency. Next to Nick is Zbigniew Własowicz, Deputy Minister for Defence Policy, the Ministry of National Defence at the Republic of Poland. And next to Zbigniew is Christian Schmidt, the Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister of Defence. And the panel today is chaired by Gerhard Wallers, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung from Berlin. And as I said, we're very pleased that Konrad Adenauer is the co-organizer of today's session. Over to you, Gerhard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robin. I understand before we start, we will have a video, kind of as an introduction to the session. So. Yeah, that was short. That's right. So let me welcome everybody here to this session, Revitalizing Europe's Security and Defense. As mentioned, my name is Gerhard Wallers. I'm with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation is a Christian democratic foundation in Germany. The issues we deal with is our democracy, social market economy, rule of law, European integration, but as well foreign policy and defense policy. The foundation is active in more than 80 countries around the world, and we are very happy that we can be a strategic partner to this conference. I would suggest to start, I would rather give maybe 2 or 3 thoughts. I do believe that this session very much ties in to sessions we already had on Europe, on European integration, on NATO's response to the financial difficulties, and listening to the debates, I found that there were 3 points I would like to raise to set the stage for the discussion we will have. One is that it seems that the level of ambition for Europe to play a major role, to play a more decisive role in security is rather high. But budgets are rather low and are not increasing, but are even getting more tighter. So the question was and is, how can we do more, or at least better, with less? The second point I found was that Europe seems to be very much absorbed by dealing with its financial problems, structural issues. Furthermore, when it comes to the public is rather shy to put defense issues or international engagement high on the agenda. And my third observation, it seems when it comes to the strategic cultures in Europe that they are very diverging, specifically when it comes to the readiness of using military force. So money, public support, diverging cultures, these three elements seem to be rather an impediment for further European security engagement. And my first question, therefore, is to the panelists, and I would like to start with them with this and give them a first shot. Taking all this into account, in light of these challenges, isn't it impossible, really, to revitalize European security? And I would like to ask Christian Schmidt to start first. Please.
Thank you, Gerhard. I would reflect and ask whether revitalization is the appropriate approach, as I think there are the first developments of getting vivid the European security defense policy as it has been found in the last 10 years and improved in the last 10 years. The question is, the glass half full or half empty? I would, as a politician, optimistic politician, say we're on the way to get a half-full glass. But we are on a stage where we should reflect what the challenges and what our goals are. Remember that after the Kosovo mission in 1999 and the year 2000, this was the start for the European Union to think about having somehow an own capability to act, including militarily, including in a case not only of conflict containing, but of conflict setting and of taking military measures. I think we have improved in two areas. The first is in a starting of cooperation and integration, be it on the military level, as we have the idea of, and not only the idea of battle groups, which are not the full answer, but which are a first step. And we are on the way to understand that it's not only about the military, it is to have a political consent about what we want, what the joint analysis of threats and challenges is, and how we organize. So this is where we are just on where we stand. We have some reasonable success. If I would refer to U4, we have seen the short video tape, and there is a success in Atalanta, for example. Mm-hmm. But we have to confess that we are not, and we should not think that we could double NATO capabilities. Instead of this, we should think of about some adaptation to capabilities which are better in NATO and which could be added with special European capabilities. For it is not only the sheer military power, but we have seen that all conflicts we were in requests a lot of more, especially training especially security sector reform as a whole, including police, justice, court capabilities, and so on. And there's something Europeans could organize and have organized and contribute to the whole picture. So understanding is just a complement and not a unique capability. This leads to the understanding that we need reliability, one on each other, NATO and European Union on NATO. This is more than Berlin Plus. And we need, among the member states of European Union, reliability about sharing and pooling initiatives, as we call them these days. If you look about the labels, we have two labels, sharing and pooling, Ghent initiative, you refer to on the European level, and smart defense on NATO level. Just if I look on what my country has taken over responsibility in projects, these are projects with partially have the same content on NATO and European Union, be it the Maritime Patrol Aircraft Initiative, and where there is possible an addition in terms of security sector reform capabilities. So we are on the way. We have drawn we have lessons learned, but we should not have the idea that we could have a European capability which covers all parts of crisis reaction.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, speak Vlosovic, please.
Gerard, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. It is an honor. One observation that I cannot resist sharing with you, something actually obvious. That's the environment in which we, I mean the international community, is operating, and the parameters that we have at our disposal, and that unpredictable character of the processes that we have to deal with. Incredible dynamism and incredible pace. Now, I joined Minister of Defense about 2 years ago, and then when we started preparing ourselves for the European Union presidency, which we concluded a couple of months ago. So when I look now from this perspective of 2 years at what we were thinking about, what we were planning to do, and what I know now when we sum up what we have done, it seems to me that we have been in two different worlds, in two different realities. So we covered such a distance from then to now. And the greatest challenge that we have, be it NATO, European Union, any other international mechanism, is to adjust ourselves to new challenges of the international community. It's not enough because we have to readjust ourselves. So we find ourselves in a constant process of first adjusting and then readjusting ourselves to the requirements. This is something that we have to learn to live with, and it is a process. It's something that we may not have a recipe today, and we probably have to live with it, being a little bit more patient at certain cases. And that would lead me to pooling and sharing or smart defense. Christian already spoke about that. A recipe for financial problems. And it seems perfect, and it sounds very good, and it even works in some cases. We have a prominent example set by the United Kingdom and France that serves as an inspiration to many of us. We've done quite a lot, but mainly things of a lesser dimension. But the real value in pooling and sharing is to do great things. But to do it, we have to put up with certain, we have to decide on issues which might be of the most important meaning to us, to nations, to states, and so on and so forth. When we talk about pooling and sharing, we talk about giving something up. To give something up, something of essence to a nation, to a state, it's a tough and complex decision. It may require some time. To pool and share, you need a partner. To pool and share, you have to give something up. We quite often simplify the mechanism. We think that sometimes it seems to me that we think of pooling and sharing as doing things together. No, it's giving something up and letting somebody else do the job. And then the other partner gives something up and we do the job. Again, giving up in pooling and sharing is of importance. And thirdly, investing. In order to bear fruit in future, one has to invest now. And we know that before investing, we watch the coin from both sides. So, it is just to show that we are on the way, but we should not expect miracles. Therefore, we have to learn, first of all, what we live in, and then we have to grasp the mechanisms that we that we have in our disposal, and then to benefit from them at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I would like to pick up on pooling and sharing. As we discussed as well this morning, the question of sovereignty as well kicks in. Nick Whitney, Britain is rather, I understand, hesitant when it comes to sharing sovereignty. You were, before you joined the European Council on Foreign Relations, former chief executive of the European Defence Agency, which as well is an ambitious project, I understand. When one looks to the results, they are on the one hand encouraging but as well limited, if I understand that correctly. Helicopter training, maritime surveillance, European satellite communication, now air-to-air refueling. But in light of what was said, we have to adapt to new realities. We have to share responsibility. What is your take from a British perspective?
Well, the British perspective would be that all this is nonsense and that we will cooperate with the French because we have to, but they're the only actual other serious players on defence in Europe. And one of the advantages of cooperating with the French, hopefully, is that it will torpedo European defence efforts because we'll detach the French from...
That's a very straight comment.
I'm not actually here to represent that point of view because, as you remarked, I spent some time labouring in the vineyard of pooling and sharing with the Defence Agency, and so I know firsthand the difficulty of making progress there. I don't think much is happening on pooling and sharing. I don't think much is happening on smart defence. I think an enormous amount of staff officer time is being expended on it. I think there will be results of a modest kind. I don't think those results are in any way commensurate with the scale of the change that we ought to be contemplating in Europe, with the financial crisis, with the US strategic pivot towards the Pacific. The circumstances and conditions are all there for stronger European integration. And I think the fact that it's not happening or is not happening on anything like the scale and speed necessary, demonstrates that collectively we're not really terribly serious about defense in Europe. We're not comfortable with armed force and armed forces. I mean, here am I sitting next door to a Polish minister. I immediately have to retract that in relation to Poland. But as a generalization, we are very keen on what we get out of defense spending. We're very focused on jobs. We're very focused on what defense can do for an industrial policy. We're very focused on exports. But as for the actual business of preserving, using armed forces, much less easy to see what Europeans nowadays think they're for. We know what they're not for. They're not there to keep the Russians out, because time has moved on, and even if Mr. Putin returns to the presidency and is abrasive and a difficult neighbor, we won't really fear armed conventional attack by the Russians on Europe. And they're not there either for faring forth and doing lots of liberal interventionism in far-flung places like Afghanistan and Iraq, because we've tried that, and it wasn't a sort of experience that we want to repeat. So my analysis is that there's a sort of general mood of intervention fatigue in Europe, a sense that we perfectly well could become a big Switzerland, keep ourselves to ourselves, cut defense spending to the bone, and that we wouldn't lose much, that we're actually pretty safe, in fact, unprecedentedly safe where we live in Europe at the moment. The terrible thing is I think there's quite a lot to be that's true about this point of view, but there are two things critically I think it misses. One is that you can never tell when your armed forces will be required. I know this is a sort of self-serving argument that armed forces love to use, but it is true. If you look at the Falklands, if you look at the first Gulf War, if you look at the Libyan intervention, no one foresaw those. So you do have to be prepared for the unexpected. And if I may slightly take issue with one remark of Christian Schmidt's, it does seem to me pretty clear that after the US pivot, we should be thinking about being able to act as Europeans with a full range of capabilities and not just the smaller, easier training and security assistance tasks. The other thing, my last point, is that I think we've lost track of how armed force and armed forces are there not merely to counter a range of threats, which are not always plausible, but are there as instruments of statecraft. They're there as contributions to power and influence. And that if we as Europeans wish to continue in a multipolar world, to be able to exert influence and control, promote our own interests, defend our values in places as near as North Africa and the Middle East, then we must keep taking defense seriously, and more seriously than we do now.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. You said we are pretty safe, but one never knows when the army actually is needed. I recall my time when I was in the US in 2001 in September. I think nobody would have imagined that an Article 5 situation would arrive. But it did. So when I just take your comment on how serious Europeans are, a very gloomy one, is that a little bit as well the perspective from the US, although we do hear how much they want to encourage Europeans to do more when it comes to European defense?
First of all, I want to add my thanks to the organizers for a wonderful conference. It's really a terrific event. It's an honor to be here, and thanks to the sponsors who are making it possible. It's going to take some effort, but I would like to actually deepen the gloom that Nick has just started. And if this is my own view, it doesn't represent certainly the United States view in any shape, form, or fashion. You asked, as part of your opening questions, you mentioned the idea of getting more from less, doing more with less. The first time I actually heard the expression "do more with less" reflects my age. It was 1981, I think. I was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. And it was the phrase which actually had started in the post-Vietnam era, as defense cuts had cut deeply into U.S. readiness. And the theme in the mid-1970s was "get more with less." And I heard it in the context of absolute scorn. By that time, defense budgets were actually beginning to rise again, and the whole notion of doing more with less in that era had been swept aside as something that was really unlikely to ever be something you could actually do. The answer is you really cannot do more with less. You can choose which tasks you're not going to do, which priorities you're not going to reach, but you can't really do much more with less. You can certainly spend more efficiently. We talk about that a lot. If you look back at the history of the United States experience in the post-World War II era, I think there are a lot of things that Americans need to keep in mind. We've been having this conversation for a long time now. The questions that you've asked have been on the table for decades. They've been acutely on the table in the last decade especially. But we've been having this conversation for a long time, and people considerably brighter than me have tried to answer these questions comprehensively and thus far have not been able to. The good work that's come out, the successes that we've had, and Ambassador Dalder talked a little bit about some of those this morning, have come from the good work of people like Christian and others who just chip away at the problem little by little, and through that actually make some progress despite the gloom and the difficulty that's around. But I think Americans need to keep in mind the uniqueness of American circumstances in the post-World War II era. I give America some credit for a degree of coherence in defense planning and capability generation. I would not have done that during my time working at the Pentagon, where it seemed to be sort of just one damn thing after another, and how did we get money that actually translated into capability? You can never actually discern that. But there are at least 4 circumstances that were quite unique to the American post-World War II position. We came out of World War II with a fantastic industrial base and a comprehensive industrial base that included aviation, the first elements of space. We were building a ship a day in World War II. We had deployed an enormous force in the Pacific and in Europe. We knew a lot about logistics, and we had this enormous starting point that Europe lacked. We also, after World War II, developed and benefited from enormously a creative and wealthy private sector that both provided intellectual talent and wealth that defense was able to leverage, and actual wealth. And I often think about the U.S. defense budget and the amount of money we've spent in the post-World War II era, and think that the real lesson is if you just throw enough money at a problem, you're eventually going to get some capacity out of it. So regardless of how inefficient or efficient that you are. We also, in the post-war era, had a combination of serious external threats and internal political drivers, jobs related to the defense industrial base, that sustained a reasonable level of defense spending over time. There are certainly ups and downs. There's a very obvious 20-year up and down cycle in American defense spending, but over time there was a pretty clear support for some strong level of defense spending. And we had a consolidated political history by that time, so that people from Alabama and New Hampshire and Oregon all viewed various things going on in the world either as threats or advantages to the United States. Obviously, there were big debates about the degree of threat, but people felt more or less like they were one political unit that faced the same world situation. Contemporary Europe today, you find elements of each of those 4 advantages in parts of Europe, but you find none of those 4 advantages in Europe as a whole, and you can't start over. And without those unique advantages, I guess my gloom is getting gloomier than I thought. Without those kinds of unique advantages, it's pretty difficult to have the kind of defense coherence that I think we'd all like to see. I wanted to raise 2 longer-term questions, because I do see this conversation, as I said, that we've been having for a long time now. It's transcended Republican and Democratic administrations in the United States. It's transcended center-right and center-left governments in NATO allies. And it always seems to me when you have this kind of phenomenon going on with a lot of people thinking about it over the course of time, I always begin to ask, what are the really fundamental things that are driving our inability to get the kind of defense coherence in Europe that we would like to see? I think there are at least 2. My own view is that to have a really coherent defense policy, you have to know what you're defending, and you have to be confident that what you're defending is in fact worth defending. It's worth the blood and treasure that you're going to put into it. It seems to me that over the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen at least two indications that Europe does not have the kind of confidence that would render defense coherence really possible. The first is a lack of confidence in democratically accountable institutions, which we all have now. But I think the response to the Euro crisis has been one acute demonstration that there is a tendency to reach for technocratic solutions. The EU is often faulted for a democratic deficit, for being remote from its citizens, and for not being truly accountable for the decisions that come out of Brussels or the upper reaches of Europe. And that lack of confidence in the kinds of institutions that we actually have seems to me to cause Europe to seek some sort of political middle ground wherein it, in a sense, looks for a way to get results rather than a democratically accountable process, out of fear that democratically accountable governments constantly facing elections cannot get to real solutions to very complicated problems. So there's a lack of confidence in the actual political structure that Europe has now, and I think this increasingly, you see this in the United States too. You increasingly among the intelligentsia see not just tolerance for regimes which have basically politically authoritarian characteristics combined with economic liberalization, but actually admiration for the results that those kinds of regimes are thought to be able to achieve. That's kind of a lack of confidence in present institutions. There's a lack of confidence in the future that you see manifest in the demographic trends in Europe. If you look at the United States and the French, in fact, birth rates, it's about just below 2.1 children per woman. That's the replacement rate. France is actually going to exceed the United States in 2012 if the CIA estimate is correct. We all know the CIA is always right about everything, but they're both basically healthy. The UK is down, I think, between just above 1.9. But the rest of Europe, the Nordic states are at about 1.7, and then you get down into Italy and Spain, and it drops down at 1.5 and 1.4. Those kinds of numbers of how many people want to have children and imagine a future are indicative of a lack of confidence in the future. And when you have that kind of lack of confidence in your own future, you begin to have a difficult time justifying, defending what it is that you are. I'll leave it with that, but I think we have some long-term structural things to deal with that are going to make it difficult to get out of the short-term solutions that we've been trying to work so far.
Yeah, thank you. I will come back to that, to the question of the lack of confidence. But one thing I would like to ask Christian Schmidt, because this was something when one was listening to the debates we had over the course of the today and yesterday. You spoke about reliability. One has to be reliable. And my sense was, listening to the discussions we had when it came to Germany, there was, there were some remarks that did put in doubt a little bit the reliability of Germany, and they pointed to the Libya discussion and our decision to abstain militarily, and as well it was pointed out to the reservation we do have because of our parliament. So I don't want to go further, but I would really very much like to ask you to maybe comment on that and maybe straighten the things a little bit out, please.
Thank you. If I just am allowed to say that what this gloomy perspective we heard from Nick Whitney's comment, some moments I thought, lucky you sitting here and able to speak freely, eloquently about your experience. Maybe I come back to this situation in some years and to some of your findings you said. I would just underline that I think it's not only to have the soft capabilities to Europe, but I'm planning for having a convergence of different contributions as I could not imagine that probably in our lifetime, but not in the next 5 to 10 years, we will be able to have, without assistance of NATO, in the sense of the Berlin Plus arrangement, and making use of NATO capabilities, especially be it, let me say, in command and control, intelligence capabilities, and some others, full scale. By the way, the lessons learned from Libya show that it is not only the question whether all participate, it was the experience that those being able to participate, and the two named strategic security nations of Europe were not able to perform fully without assistance from others. So this is just a finding, but we have to realize that we won't overcome this just in due time. But we have to work on it to get closer. For example, as we have to see that air fueling, air fueling is an issue which we could not deliver on European level, and it's a good answer that we said now at our last ministerial, we will launch an air fueling program or a consent about this. But if we come to, should I say, the German case, the German situation, yep, I would say this is more about the not Bob Kagan's idea of Mars and Venus, but probably a distinct understanding of the quality of the challenges and threats and the quality of possible answers to challenges and threats. And the way of discussing this. So I would play for getting a closer political joint analysis capability on European and NATO level. If you look very precisely on what has happened with Libya, you could see that this was not only a discussion which took place in Germany. The conclusion somehow was another, but if you look on the debate in the US, there was not that much preparedness to join the French and other ideas which came now to bring down Gaddafi. Having said this, I know that there is a point where you're beyond all discussions and the plate for getting a joint threat analysis, you have to decide whether you act or not. And indeed, I think we have to strengthen our capability to react soon, including the political capability. So this should be manageable. We, in our country, like in some others, referring to the Dutch, for example, they have to go through Parliament to get approval for foreign missions. And you won't be able to change this, basically. There is a possibility of the degree. For example, some years ago, we developed the idea whether we should have something like a dedication, a basic dedication of units of capabilities to the alliance, be it European or NATO level, and that we should think about having somehow a possibility to withdraw if the escalation of the mission would bring other questions. But we have to understand and see that this needs a political conviction. And coming back to Bob Kagan, sometimes I think, I don't know, should I say lucky US? I don't know really whether they are lucky what they're doing, but we have to state that there is a different understanding of threats and challenges and how to act. And we did not overcome this after the Iraq War, where we have the split between old and new Europe, as Don Rumsfeld explained it or described it. But we have to sit down in our own societies and political scenery and discuss how far we could come to a joint or closer understanding, cultural and political understanding, what is the need of security. So I come to very basic issues, and all other what we talk about, this about hesitation, about in one case or in another case, this is somehow nothing more than reaction to this issue. I have concern that on the American side, where I do see some understanding of reaction, which I would not think that this appropriate one, which you could bring over to Europeans, and on the European side, a misunderstanding of the need of military capabilities brings not a gloomy, but to a very challenging discussion. I would like just to stress what at the last meeting, some of us were sit together in Brussels for the Brussels Forum of the German Marshall Fund, where Mark Grossman had described, and I think he was very right, that the understanding of state of law in the context of a military threat from abroad seems to diverge. And we would not be able to close this gap just by not talking about this. There are serious questions we will have culturally and politically to talk about. Some of these questions are used in my country from some to say, okay, we cannot do anything. Yeah. But by the way, if I may add, except Libya, we have got a broad support in be it Afghanistan, Kosovo, Bosnia, Atalanta, in Parliament for supporting these missions, including now where we do not reduce significantly in Afghanistan, and we got a broad support, including the opposition. But there's a need to make transparent to the electorate and to the society and the political class that there is in their sense and understanding of reaction and action, this is reasonable. There we should work on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, John, I just want to call on you. You know, when Christian Schmidt says there is a different perception of threat in Europe and maybe in the United States, would you like to comment on that? Do you see that? Yeah.
Well, I think inevitably there.
So this would go beyond, let's say, the question of confidence of the Europeans.
Well, I think there are two distinct points. I think the United States, because it has a set of global responsibilities and still sees itself as a globally responsible power, whatever the pivot may eventually mean or not mean, pivot towards Asia. The United States is, I think, charged with leading whatever reaction there will be, for example, to North Korea's missile launch. That's a long way from Europe. And the United States has been in the position of leading, despite a lot of European contribution, leading the effort to organize a coherent response to the Iranian threat. And that goes back from this administration's efforts back to the previous administration, in some ways even before that. So I think the fact that the United States perceives itself as having not just global interests but global responsibilities does drive it to see threats in a way that perhaps with an urgency that I see is sometimes not present in Europe. These are all tendency statements. You can find Europeans who are far better on both of those issues than many people in the United States, are far more urgent about both those. But I think it's probably true that the United States has a different threat perception and a different level of willingness to employ force when we perceive that other alternatives really have been exhausted.
Thank you. I think we have 30 minutes to go, or 35, because then the cocktail starts. So I would, I'm hesitant to ask further questions, but I rather would like to open it up and give the audience the possibility to react. So, I would like to call on you. Everybody should state his name, please, and the organization he stands for. We do need microphones, if I understand that. So there is a mic. So why don't we start with you?
Werner Fasslabend, former Austrian defense minister and now president of the Austrian Atlantic Association. A short statement. I'm really concerned about European capabilities in the military field. And I'm even more concerned about the development. It's only 5 or 6 years ago that we had a relationship of 50-50 between Europe and the United States. We now have 70, 75 to 25, and it's only a question of a few years that we will have a relationship of 80 to 20. And so far the question, what is really the problem, what I see is, as long as the Europeans don't overtake responsibility for their own security and the stability in their neighborhood, in their immediate environment, you will not have any capability. This is the basis for it. And so far for me is the question, why don't we overtake it? Because most of the people in Europe are convinced the Americans will do it. That's the fact. And it's not only the people on the street, but it's also most of the politicians, just a small group I want to exclude out of this. And insofar, I think the necessary steps we have to do is to overtake gradually responsibility within Europe. And this will be also a big advantage for the Americans, because this will be the only way to keep strong and efficient allies for the future. That's what I see. And insofar, I would like to ask the panel, what can we do in order to build up this consciousness of European responsibility, also of EU responsibility, because all the nations for themselves, they will not do it, because they don't have problems in their own country. And outside their country, it will be the Americans. This is one of the basic problems I see. And insofar, I think we should try to find out what can we do to overtake more security and more military responsibility for the Europeans. This is the question I want to ask the panel.
Thank you. Please. And I will take afterwards 2 more, and then we give the panel the chance to answer. Please.
Thank you very much. I am Federico Yaniz, a retired general of the Spanish Air Force and a member of the Atlantic Treaty Association of Spain. Well, I think that today we had listened many interesting things, but the title of this panel was Revitalizing Security and Defense of Europe. And we had heard that some panelists said that we had advanced in these 3 or 4 years very much. But I have heard another panelist saying that some of the questions and sentences that we have heard today have been mentioned very often. And in fact, my question is very clear. When and how we are going to put together NATO and European defense matters? We have the Lisbon Treaty with so many possibilities. It was already 4 years ago that was approved. It's there. Permanent structural cooperation is there. We cannot play this game forever. We need it is impossible that we think there is no common, no relationship, no real formal interchange between NATO and the European defense initiatives, because some countries are blocking that. And we cannot play with that forever. We are putting our future on the stake. We can't play with defense and security matters for good. We need to take decisions. We cannot afford to have two staff in Brussels very close together, 2 kilometers far apart, dealing with the same matters, not communicating to each other, and then having operations sometimes in the Pacific or in the Horn of Africa, almost the same, duplicating the operation, and the commander of the operation at the same headquarters in Britain, in Great Britain, over there, sitting side by side and having 2 operations. How is that possible? See, we need to be serious, and please, I think there are people here wise enough to try to find a solution to these problems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please, and then the gentleman over there.
Eugenio Smolar, Polish Institute for International Affairs, and also Polish Atlantic Association, I will add, to add my credentials. I would like to take an issue with the good colonel. I must say that being a natural pro-American since my long time, I have a problem with your proposition here. Coherent strategic culture of the United States was broken during the Bush era. The whole idea of the liberal intervention was compromised in Iraq. Bremer, remember this name? The conflict between civilians and military, even within the United States administration, were famous among allies. Look, we talk to each other. We learn lessons. So if there is less enthusiasm for engagement, also you need to sort of accept a proposition that is also the result of our experiences. And I know that politicians, and I must commend Minister Schmidt, and I am stressing Minister, for quite actually putting this, mentioning Iraq. I am adding to salt to injury. American ambassador resigned from the American diplomatic service because of the conflicts with the military. And I know because he was before an ambassador to Warsaw. I can cite you a lot of events when actually the military have dictated policy, and the same happened in Afghanistan.
I'm sorry, when the military...
Military dictate policies. Also in Afghanistan, we already had at least three different strategies for Afghanistan, and we are there for 10 years. So I'm not saying we should be there. We've been with you as a new Europe in Iraq, and we are proud of it. But in order to sort of constructively go forward, we must also rethink certain things which happened in the last years. Without that, and even the number of children would look differently in the United States, if not including the illegal immigration and Latinos level of birth. So, you know, we have challenges. This is the diplomatic language. We have challenges, but if we are to overcome them, we must do it together, but not over-optimistic speech about sort of Americans' achievement. I am afraid that as a result of these experiences, a notion of responsibility to protect will suffer, and we see it in Syria, and we will see it probably in the years to come. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. And now the last question, the first round, please. Whatever. I mean, please.
Janusz Onyszkiewicz, former defense minister, now chairman of Euro-Atlantic Association in Poland. We are discussing the defense of Europe. And my question is, what is the role of Europe in defending Europe? And there is a certain problem, because if we look at Lisbon Treaty, we can see that there is a 41st article saying that in case a country is attacked by another one, then all other countries are an obligation to come with assistance. What does that mean? We all know that European Union is not a military pact, but nevertheless, I think that some clarification, maybe not now, but sometime in future, would be very much something which should be done. And my second question, also to Minister Schmidt, is you know, in Poland for centuries, we were always afraid of strong Germany. Now, some of us begin to feel that Germany is getting too weak. And just to illustrate that, you know, in Poland we have about 900 tanks. In Germany you have so far 350, and you go to reduce that to 250. Well, the question is, who is wrong? Are we wrong and you are right? Is the other way around? Or maybe we are both wrong? Well, so this is the question. I think that we really should look at various sort of situations and really develop sort of common approach, common European approach to the defense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we had 5 questions all in all. Question about the consciousness of responsibility, the implication of supposedly duplication of structures, the doubts of American achievements, and the question, what is the role of Europe in defending Europe, and last but not least, the question if Germany is getting too weak. So who wants to be the first to answer some of these questions? Maybe Nick.
I think there was one. I'm sorry, Nick,
yeah.
First. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think there was one question that was directed to me about Iraq. When I talk about American coherence and defense capability, I by no means intend to say that everything has been perfect and that there have been no failures. That post-war record includes a static situation in Korea after an armistice that's still in place. It includes the Vietnam War, which shook Allied confidence long before Iraq. It includes Desert One, the failed attempt to rescue hostages in Iran. I could go on. So there are failures operationally throughout American military history, as there are in I think every military history. And if I tried to imply that the United States was flawless or all capable, then let me correct that. Certainly the United States is not. But I do think that over the course of the post-war era, the United States has demonstrated the ability to field a very capable set of military forces with the amount of money that we've spent. And again, you can argue much of that goes from those 4 unique factors coming out of World War II, including the fact that we just spent a lot of money on defense capability. Iraq, in some ways, points to that. The United States military, in the case of Iraq in 2003, deposed Saddam very, very quickly, and with relatively low casualties on either side. One of the flaws in Iraq was planning for a post-war humanitarian tragedy rather than an insurrection, which turned out to be extremely bloody and was not well planned for. That is not, in a sense, to say that the capability that we bought over the course of the years was bad. It wasn't. But it wasn't executed properly or wasn't planned for properly, wasn't anticipated properly in the case of Iraq. So I'm thinking about the capability that we have at the operational level and our ability to sustain that over the course of time. I think on the other kinds of questions on European responsibility, I prefer to defer to the other panelists, and if you want to come back to me at the end, if I have something to add, I will.
Okay, fine. So
sorry if I went before you.
No, please. I think I'd like to focus on the issues of strategic culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, I entirely take the point about the idiocy of the way in which EU and NATO are prevented by the concerns of Cyprus and Turkey from interacting. This is wasteful. This is, in practice, practical people find a way to get around this. But I think much more fundamental is the question of strategic culture. I have a lot of sympathy with the point that Werner Fastleben made. In a sense, Europeans have been infantilized in matters of defense by a half-century of happily sheltering under the US nuclear and massive conventional umbrella, and, as we've frequently been reminded, essentially free riding. And this, I'm afraid, is true even of countries certainly such as the United Kingdom, where the British have never been hesitant about getting into a fight, but the fact is that our involvements in Iraq and Afghanistan were essentially, and I think this is true of a lot of European countries who went into those conflicts, were essentially oriented on scoring brownie points in Washington rather than because we fundamentally believed that this was some European interest that we were defending. And if we thought we were going into Afghanistan to keep the streets of London safe from terrorism, well, we've certainly learned that that was a complete miscalculation. I do think there are fundamental differences in strategic culture across the Atlantic. I hope that Europeans and Americans will always be the closest allies each other's have. But some of the things we don't like discussing very much at the moment, like American use of drones for targeted killings in pursuit of a widespread war against Al-Qaeda. I don't think most Europeans are actually sympathetic with that. The upcoming bombing of Iran. I don't think most Europeans are fundamentally sympathetic with that. I think most Europeans would, if push came to shove, be more content to see a nuclearized Iran and deal with the consequences of containing it. I'd be interested in feedback on that. So if it is, last point, if it is issues of strategic culture, then I'm very much with Christian Smith on this, that what is basically needed are some real conversations. But the ones that need to take place, and the real reflections, are first and foremost amongst Europeans. Mm-hmm. I want to see, to revitalize the European defense security policies, I want to see a European defense review, and I want to see Europeans seeing what they can do about coming together as 27 member states, looking at where we are in the second decade of the 21st century, after a very clear statement of realignment of American global strategy, and trying to work out a better common basis for our attitudes towards defense.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Vlozovic, please.
Oh, thank you. In responding, let me refer to what I said at the beginning, because I still believe that lots of things that we have right now in front of us, in many ways, are brand new to us. So we agree that we have no ready recipes how to deal with them. And again, I would return to the theme of a process that will take us to the point when we eventually get all necessary experience, knowledge, and conclusions. Let me also share some my experience from the last 6 months when we presided over the Council of the European Union. And again, pooling and sharing. Before we, or at the beginning of the 6 months, pooling and sharing was something that was quite regularly debated. But I have to tell you that during the 6 months and after the 6 months, pooling and sharing, but also smart defense, the same mechanism, have become or has become a theme of practically every debate, consultations, multilateral, bilateral, and so on and so forth. Which brings me to the conclusion, or which makes me believe that gradually we get to the crux of the matter. And again, we won't have it today, we won't have it tomorrow, but we will have it. Now, the leadership is something that we all know is a must. Without a political leadership, we will not get anywhere. And that's why it is so good to see that ministers of states of importance or contribution to the field of defense are participating in a forum like this one. That's one of the ways actually to sort things out. And thirdly, defense spending in Europe. It's declining, and it should not. So it will again require a lot of courage on the part of politicians to be able to stop that trend, because if it does go ahead, we will have serious problems. It is tough because we have financially difficult circumstances globally, but still it has to be done if we want to have what was said by the gentleman, that Europe is able to defend itself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Christian Schmidt.
Thank you. If I'm allowed to start with Mr. Oniszkiewicz's observation and reference to Radek Sikorski's speech in Berlin, I agree with Radek and with your observation. Germans would tend to speak better in English about leadership. They don't want to talk about führen. So maybe this describes the situation where we end. What do we need in Europe? We need political leadership to make clear that sharing and pooling and smart defense are smart ideas, but this is not an excuse to reduce investment in security. Mm-hmm. It's just the attempt to make better profit, of combining capabilities. The second is that I think the European Union and other European countries are not prepared to be governed by somehow a consultation of big powers. This is probably, especially in my country, if there's a Helmut Kohl doctrine, the doctrine is that you have to consult and to look on the smaller member states of European Union to get a consent. The interesting challenge is to lead and to bring others, all us to the table. And leading in foreign and security issues will be a challenge to the traditional two nuclear powers, France and the United Kingdom, to Poland, to Spain, to Italy, to Germany, and to the other countries. But we have learned, and this is why I was very happy to hear this Polish foreign secretary saying this, because he would not be in the probably seen as somebody who has been asked for it by Germans to do. That we need to understand that there must, Henry Kissinger's famous question, which he never has posed, but he says he now would think he should have posed, what is the telephone number of European policy, is a key understanding. There must be, answer has been, we may have to understand that this not only security policy, but the issue where we are in, European financial issues, they are, in my personal observation, just the third stage of a security issue. The first was 9/11. And the second was Lehman Brothers. Mm-hmm. There was a very, very close connection to it, because we had, and especially the US, had to invest in its economy to survive the situation after 9/11 and what was expected to come. We not have fully understanding in Europe about economic, financial, and let me, in a time where we talk about rare earth, in the raw material issue, where we have a lack of strategic approach to the question. So if leadership would mean that we put this on the table, we would not have a singular answer from one side, but pressing to get an answer, to get a joint answer. This is one of the key issues which would bring us, Werner Fasselhaben, I think, to more responsibility. Mm-hmm. And not only to talk, but to have capabilities. By the way, we have had the Helsinki headline goals. does anybody know here exactly what the figures were? 60,000, where we ended? I cannot complain because I was among those answering in saying, okay, somehow in Riga we say this is nearly close to Helsinki headline goals, and we have fully missed the answer to the experience of the year 2000, that we need a capability to act, I would not say in all stages of expansion of a conflict, but to moderate a conflict with military and other means. Honestly, this is, let me say, this is half full. 18,000 is a third of 60,000, but behind is that we have to get again in an understanding, not about figures, but about capabilities which are necessary basically to act jointly. And the second answer in this context would be, is there anybody in the room expecting that one single European country would be able to deliver? I include the United Kingdom and France. None of them would be able to deliver. I don't talk about the others, including my country. So the only answer can be put the very serious capabilities, part of capabilities we have. We are not empty in Europe. Together, and we have to provide the organizational and budgetary capabilities to bring it. My hope is that we draw the right conclusions out of the pressure we have in the budget situation of today. There's nothing bad where you don't have a good part in it. The good part could be that is a wealthy pressure of getting our capabilities connected. I agree absolutely with my friend and colleague Ship that the experience is that there is some speed going up in sharing and pooling. Probably it's not yet sufficient.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, when it comes to the Kissinger question of the telephone number, it reminds me, you know, we could as well as Europeans ask the Americans what is the telephone number? Is it the telephone number of the White House? Is it the telephone number of the Congress, of the Senate? When it comes to formulating policies in the United States, you have as well different institutions that are really relevant. We are now time-wise at almost 6:30. So I would, is there any urgent question to be posed? There is one, and I would like to give the lady the possibility to ask the question. Please.
Thank you. Iveta Chernov, I'm Executive Director of ICW, and I'm also a Young Atlanticist Fellow with the Atlantic Council. I would just like to put the elephant in the room and kind of make him kind of step in a little bit. I think it's the economy that we're talking about here. And when we talk about spending and how that's going down in Europe, I think we just have to really ask the question, is NATO, Europe, and the US, in terms of economics and finances, lagging behind? Are we actually becoming the developing world? Just if we think about the rise of Asia, if we think about the shift towards the East and the South, I just think we first need to think about all these economic issues and then start thinking about spending in defense again. And unless we fix the finances and the economics, I don't think we'll see the trend in spending go up again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Who wants to respond to this question? Is Europe becoming a developing world? Free choice. Nick.
Well, I'll just observe that I haven't seen whether CIPRI have treated us to European defence expenditure figures for 2011 yet, but certainly in 2010 we were still spending the best part of 200 billion euros between us in Europe, which was comfortably ahead of what Russia and China and Brazil and India put together were spending. So I'm rather sympathize with you that I just don't think, looking ahead at the decade of austerity that we confront, I just don't think that it's realistic to expect an increase in defence expenditure. It will drift down further, which makes the challenge of, alas, trying to get, okay, not more out of less, but at least more useful, relevant, and capabilities out of less resources, all the more pressing. The good news is that there's tremendous scope for doing that. I'll start with, we should restructure all European air forces on a pan-European basis. We should do air policing in Europe on a continental basis. And you will, if you do the sums, you will discover that you don't actually need more than 2,000 combat aircraft which can't deliver smart munitions and are not properly integrated into an I-star picture. And if you got serious about restructuring European defence on a wide basis, you could actually manage with the money we spend now.
Thank you, Christian Schmidt.
I've forgotten an answer, and I would like to stress, thank you, Spanish participant, for this engaged commitment to combining European and NATO capabilities. Good news, sir, when the first time I had the opportunity to see the European High Representative in these times, he was not accustomed to cross the street one times a month to see the section of NATO. It improved when the section of NATO became European responsible. But I think in the practical, pragmatic approach, things have improved. What we have to understand is that we will not have a joint body. It remains to separable but not separate. We are not separate any longer, but separable would mean that we are able to take a part of own responsibility with the assistance, if necessary, of NATO. And I think we now have to come back to NATO, to more political organization. Everything has been said already. In the year 2005, and the Munich conference, we raised the issue of bringing back NATO to a political alliance. And honestly, I am not sure whether we fulfilled our understanding up to now fully. If we would do, we could see that there are a lot of more convergences in the field of other international policy tools you need before you came in the need, the need of military power. So there is something to do more, and to combine the political level, not only the military level. This is what I'm planning for.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is the glass half full or half empty? Obviously, I want to end here on an optimistic note. Now, it was. I think everybody here in this room agrees that more has to be done, and it was mentioned that political leadership is required. I do believe that at the same time as well, public debate is required, and hopefully this session did contribute a little bit to raise awareness. I would like to thank the panelists very much for participating. I would like to thank everybody here in the room for asking questions, and without further ado, I wish you a good time in the cocktail hours. Thank you very much. So, yeah, there is an announcement I should make. It says, please.